It was a quiet night, the kind where even the air seemed to rest. Daniel had fallen asleep in the armchair by the window, and when I walked into the room, I found myself pausing at the sight of him, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. His face, relaxed and vulnerable in sleep, looked almost foreign, different from the confident and often guarded expression I was used to. Daniel and I had known each other for years, practically since childhood. We'd been through every phase of life together. Awkward adolescence, first heartbreaks, late-night talks about the meaning of it all. And now, here we were, adults with our own routines, our own struggles. But somehow, our bond had only grown stronger. I moved to pull a blanket over him, careful not to wake him, and as I did, my hand brushed against his shoulder. It was such a small, insignificant touch, but the warmth of it lingered longer than I expected. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering near him, caught between wanting to draw back and wanting to stay. A gentle sigh escaped him, his lips parting slightly, and I quickly looked away, the quiet vulnerability in that sound making my heart race in a way I didn't fully understand. I settled onto the couch across from him, unsure why I didn't simply go to bed, but something about the room, about the stillness of the night and the closeness between us, kept me there. The longer I watched him, the harder it was to ignore the feelings that had been quietly building over the past few months. I dismissed them as nostalgia, the warmth of a long friendship. But tonight, they felt different. He felt different. In his sleep, Daniel shifted, his arm falling to the side of the chair, his hand now hanging in the space between us. Without thinking, I reached out, letting my fingers hover close to his, not touching, but feeling the pull. The silence of the room seemed to amplify the distance, the inches between us feeling like a chasm and yet closer than ever before. I didn't know what I was waiting for, why I couldn't bring myself to break the moment. It was as if some unspoken tension had finally risen to the surface, no longer content to stay hidden in the quiet spaces between words and glances. Daniel stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and for a moment he looked at me, his gaze soft and searching as though he, too, felt the shift between us. He didn't pull his hand back, didn't say anything, just held my gaze. In that lingering silence, something passed between us, a silent acknowledgement, a recognition of something we hadn't dared to name. For a moment, neither of us moved, as if the air around us had thickened, holding us in place. Daniel's gaze softened, his expression a mix of surprise and something deeper, something unspoken yet understood. The realization of that connection hit me like a slow wave, rising within and flooding every part of me. He broke the silence first, his voice barely a whisper. "Were you watching me sleep?" The question held no accusation, just curiosity, his eyes searching mine for an answer I wasn't entirely sure I had. I managed a small laugh, a sound that felt strange in the heaviness of the room. "Just making sure you weren't cold," I replied, my voice tight, the truth behind my words veiled and half buried. But his gaze didn't waver, as if he could see through every careful defense I put up. "Well, thanks," he murmured, his hand still hanging between us. I wondered if he noticed how close my hand was, how I hadn't moved it, and then, with a slight shift, he let his fingers brush against mine, just enough to make my pulse quicken. I could have pulled away, laughed it off, done anything to dispel the tension growing thicker between us, but I didn't. Instead, I met his touch, my fingers slipping between his, our hands intertwining slowly. It was a simple gesture, yet the weight of it, the quiet intimacy, was overwhelming. Daniel's gaze softened, a silent question in his eyes, one I was terrified to answer but even more afraid to ignore. "What are we doing?" he whispered, his voice so soft it was barely audible. But I heard it, felt the vulnerability in it, the tentative hope that matched the knot in my own chest. "I don't know," I admitted, my words shaky, and for a moment, the honesty between us felt raw and fragile. "But I don't want to stop." Our hands remained clasped, the warmth spreading between us, grounding me in a moment that felt like it had been a long time coming, yet so new, so full of questions. He leaned forward slightly, his face inches from mine, his breath warm against my cheek. I never thought. I didn't know. He started, but the words faltered, his gaze flickering down to our joined hands as though afraid of what he might find if he looked at me for too long. I know, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Me too. The silence that followed was filled with everything we hadn't said, everything we were too afraid to admit. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. This uncharted territory we were venturing into, a place where friendship blurred into something deeper, something that defied the boundaries we'd set around ourselves. Without thinking, I leaned closer, my heart pounding as I felt the warmth of his skin, the quiet steadiness of his breath. He didn't pull away, didn't close the distance, just held himself there, waiting, as if giving me permission to make the next move. With a deep breath, I let my hand rest on his cheek, the softness of his skin sending a shiver down my spine. He closed his eyes, leaning into the touch, his hand tightening around mine, and in that quiet moment, everything fell away. The fear, the confusion, the doubts. There was only him, only us, caught in a moment that felt both foreign and inevitable. And then, slowly, I leaned in, our lips meeting in a tentative, trembling kiss. It was gentle, hesitant, but charged with a depth of feeling we'd kept hidden for so long. The kiss deepened, growing in intensity as the quiet, unsaid things between us finally found expression, our breaths mingling in a space we hadn't dared to occupy before. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, both of us breathing heavily, our eyes still closed. The room felt different, the air thick with the weight of what had just passed between us, of the connection we'd discovered and could never ignore again. "Is this really happening?" he whispered, his voice filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. "Yes," I answered, my voice steady now, the truth of it settling over me. "I think it is." A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he let out a breath, relief and vulnerability blending in his expression. He lifted his hand, tracing a gentle line along my jaw, as if memorizing this moment, anchoring us in it. For a while, we just sat there, close enough to feel each other's warmth, neither of us daring to speak, afraid that words might somehow undo everything. "It's strange, isn't it?" he finally murmured, his voice low. "To go from all of this, years of knowing each other, to this." The way he said it, soft and tender, sent a shiver through me. "It is," I agreed, still holding his gaze. "But maybe it's been there all along, and we just didn't see it." His fingers brushed against mine again, his touch tentative yet electric, as if rediscovering something he'd always known. "Or maybe we weren't ready to see it," he said, a quiet confession slipping from his lips. I nodded, unable to tear my eyes away. "Maybe." There was a pause, the silence between us filled with a new kind of understanding. We were stepping into something fragile, something that felt like it could either bring us closer than ever or leave us stranded, unsure of where we stood. But for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt something closer to relief, as though a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. Daniel leaned back slightly, his hand slipping away but not in retreat. It was as if he wanted to savor this moment, to let the reality of it settle. He looked down, rubbing the back of his neck in that nervous way he did when he was trying to gather his thoughts. "You know, I've thought about this before," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just never thought. I mean, I didn't want to ruin what we have." Hearing him say it, hearing the quiet vulnerability in his voice, brought a warmth to my chest. "Neither did I replied, my words soft but sincere. "But sometimes, some things are worth the risk." He looked up at me, his eyes bright with something that felt both intense and gentle all at once. Then, "Can we just see where this goes?" he asked, his voice trembling with hope. I reached out, taking his hand in mine, our fingers entwining effortlessly. "I'd like that," I said, feeling the words settle between us like a promise. The hours drifted by, neither of us making a move to leave the quiet intimacy that had settled around us. Eventually, we ended up on the couch together, lying side by side with Daniel's arm resting around my shoulders, a simple gesture that felt as natural as it was comforting. The air between us was filled with an unspoken understa, and in that moment, it was enough. The quiet understanding, the acceptance of something we hadn't even dared to acknowledge until now, filled the room with a warmth I could feel deep within. Whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges or confusions we might face, I knew we'd take them on together. We sat in the darkened room for a while longer, wrapped in the quiet certainty of something just beginning, something fragile yet strong. For the first time, the silence between us wasn't filled with doubt, but with possibility. A connection we hadn't known we were searching for, but one we'd finally found in each other. The hours drifted by, neither of us making a move to leave the quiet intimacy that had settled around us. Eventually, we ended up on the couch together, lying side by side with Daniel's arm resting around my shoulders, a simple gesture that felt as natural as it was comforting. The air between us was filled with an unspoken understanding, a silent promise of trust, yet laced with the nervous excitement of crossing into unfamiliar territory. As the faint light of dawn began to seep through the blinds, Daniel shifted beside me, turning so that he could see me more clearly. His hand found mine, fingers brushing in a way that made my pulse race, the touch conveying more than words ever could. "I didn't think we'd be here like this," he whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. "I always thought, well, I guess I didn't let myself think too much about it. But now—" He paused, looking at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Now it just feels right, you know?" I nodded, barely trusting myself to speak, my voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, it does. It feels like it was always supposed to be this way." The admission felt strange, yet freeing, a truth I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. We lay there in silence, both of us wrapped up in the simplicity of the moment. He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the back of my hand, a small, affectionate gesture that sent warmth rushing through me. His touch lingered, the softness in his eyes making it impossible to look away. "I've never felt like this before," he murmured, his voice so low I almost missed it. There was a raw honesty in his words that struck me, a vulnerability that echoed my own. "With anyone." "Neither have I," I replied, my fingers tightening around his. "It's different, but good." He nodded, his gaze softening, and he leaned in, pressing his forehead gently against mine. Our breaths mingled in the quiet dawn, the world outside fading into the background, leaving just us, caught in a moment that felt like it could last forever. "I don't know where this is going," he said quietly, his voice tinged with the faintest trace of uncertainty. "But I don't want it to end." "Me neither," I whispered, the sincerity in my voice surprising even me. "I'm willing to take this one step at a time. If you are." He smiled, a warmth spreading across his face, and he nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. There were no labels, no definitions, just two people connected by something rare and beautiful, and as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the room, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for this moment, for him, for us. The sunlight grew stronger, casting a warm glow over us as we lay there, still caught in the quiet intimacy that filled the room. Neither of us seemed willing to break the spell, afraid that movement or words might shatter the fragile reality we'd stepped into. We drifted between whispers and silence, letting our hands rest together, a subtle reminder of what we'd finally allowed ourselves to feel. After a while, Daniel took a deep breath, his expression turning thoughtful. "Do you think... will this change things between us?" he asked, a hint of worry lacing his words. I paused, the weight of the question settling over me. We'd crossed an invisible line, one that had always been there, quietly unacknowledged, and there was no denying that things wouldn't be the same. But in that moment, with him so close, I felt certain that the change was something I welcomed, something we could navigate together. "I think it will," I admitted, my voice gentle, steady. "But maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's exactly what we've needed." My thumb brushed lightly over his, offering reassurance. "And whatever happens, we'll figure it out." He held my gaze for a long moment, searching my face as if he were trying to commit every detail to memory. Then, slowly, he nodded, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "You're right. It feels real, like something I want to hold on to." A comfortable silence settled between us again, our hands intertwined, fingers brushing lightly against each other. It was as though the quiet spoke louder than words could, our unspoken promises hanging in the air. I felt my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and peace, a strange, beautiful contradiction that left me feeling more alive than I had in years. Eventually, he shifted, leaning his head against my shoulder. "Do you ever wonder how long this was here?" he asked softly. "How long we were just waiting?" I swallowed, realizing that I'd often wondered the same thing. "I think maybe it's always been there, in some way," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But maybe we had to grow into it, to finally understand what it meant." He smiled, a quiet understanding in his eyes. "Maybe that's true, and maybe that's why it feels so easy now." We stayed like that for a while, caught in the warmth of each other's presence, savoring the newness, the unexpected closeness. It was a small moment, yet it felt monumental, as though something inside each of us had shifted, making room for the vulnerability we hadn't allowed ourselves to feel before. As the hours passed, we moved from conversation to silence, letting the comfort of our shared space wrap around us like a protective cocoon. With every shared glance, every gentle touch, I felt the tension of the past fade away, replaced by a quiet joy I hadn't known I'd been missing. The morning sun was fully up by now, casting a bright golden light over everything, yet the warmth between us was something else entirely. We both lingered in the moment, neither ready to pull away, the realization of what we were to each other slowly settling in. Daniel finally stretched, his arm slipping from around me, but he kept his hand close, fingers tracing patterns on the fabric of my sleeve. "Do you think we can just keep this here?" he asked, his tone almost shy, his gaze hesitant. I knew what he meant. It was like we'd created this small world for ourselves in the quiet of the early morning, a space untouched by the outside pressures and questions. But I also knew that sooner or later we'd have to figure out what this meant outside the safety of this room. "Maybe we can try," I said, the words careful, honest. "But I don't know if it'll stay contained. Not with what's happening here." His expression softened, a slight nod acknowledging the truth in my words. "You're probably right." He paused, running a hand through his hair as if he were trying to pull himself back into reality. I don't want to lose this, whatever this is." "You won't," I said firmly, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "We'll find a way to make this work. Somehow." A faint smile tugged at his lips as he looked at me, gratitude and warmth mingling in his expression. "I don't know what I did to deserve someone like you," he murmured, his voice barely audible, as if he were confessing something he'd kept hidden. The words sank into me, filling me with a warmth I couldn't quite explain. I hadn't expected him to say something so vulnerable, so quietly heartfelt. "I could say the same to you," I replied softly, letting my fingers graze his in response. For a while, we just sat there, lost in the quiet comfort of each other's presence, no longer feeling the need to explain or define what was between us. We'd stepped into something raw and uncharted, but it didn't scare me anymore. It felt like discovering a truth we'd both known all along, one that had finally surfaced. As the light shifted and the morning fully settled in, he shifted closer once more, his hand finding mine in a gentle, steady grip. "I'm here," he said softly, his voice filled with the kind of reassurance that felt like a promise. "And I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever we'd have to face in the days to come, we would be there for each other. And that knowledge, that quiet certainty, filled me with a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Together, we could take on whatever came next.